Decolonizing Indigenous education. Imagine a world where education isn't confined to classrooms, textbooks, or tests. Instead, imagine a world where knowledge is passed down through stories told by elders around the fire, through hands on learning surrounded by trees and the sound of the wind, and through traditions that have lasted for generations. Well, this was actually the reality of Indigenous education before colonization. In the beginning, many years ago, when it was just the first original inhabitant, Indigenous education in Canada was deeply rooted in oral traditions, sacred ceremonies, storytelling, and cultural teachings. Elders play a crucial role in passing down history, values, and survival skills through stories and legends. For example, the bear and the salmon was used to teach respect for nature and balance in life. Education was holistic. Children learned through observations and practice, whether it was hunting, fishing, plant medicine, or community responsibilities. Boys were taught skills like tracking and hunting from their elders, while girls learned domestic and survival skills from strong women in their family, such as the preparation of skin and pelts for making clothes, cutting and sewing, and cooking. Not to mention cultural ceremonies such as the sun dance and the sacred winter ceremonies reinforced this teaching, ensuring that knowledge was carried forward through generations to come. However, as time moved on and Europeans came to Canada, also came the detrimental effect of their colonial influence. With colonizations came the Indian Act and the residential school system designed to eradicate indigenous cultures and assimilate children into more westernized society. The government alongside church forcibly removed about 150,000 children between the ages of 7 to 15 from their families and placed them in schools where they are forbidden to speak their language, practice their tradition, or connect with their heritage. Boys are forced into unpaid labor such as farming and carpentry, while girls were trained for domestic works. The curriculum was limited, emphasizing the 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and religion, while dismissing indigenous knowledge. Many children only reaches elementary level education by adulthood. This results in long-term disadvantage leading to issues such as mental health struggles, addiction, and loss of cultural identity. Now, although residential schools are no longer in operation, with the latest ending in 1996 in Ontario, their legacy still persists. Today, Indigenous education in Canadian schools remain influenced by Western perspective. Textbooks and various curriculums often present a westernized view of history, leaving out Indigenous voices or misrepresenting their experiences. University and government education systems still prioritize Western academic structures, making it more difficult for Indigenous students to fully engage with their heritage within the classroom. With all this information in mind, let's review a government document, a high school, an elementary school, and finally our school, George Brown College, in order to investigate whether or not we as a society are doing the bare minimum in decolonizing Indigenous education and overall teaching the reality of Indigenous education. Starting with the government approach. The Ontario First Nation, Métis, and Inuit Education Policy Framework aim to improve Indigenous representation in education, but it largely worked within existing colonial structure. While it acknowledged the need for Indigenous perspective, it ultimately does bare minimum, failing to integrate Indigenous voices or approach meaningfully. The framework continued to prioritize Western academic frameworks over Indigenous ways of knowing, treating Indigenous knowledge as an addition rather than a foundation.
At the elementary level, some progress has been made. Textbooks like Aboriginal Beliefs, Values, and Aspirations, and Aboriginal Peoples in Canada, co-published by Pearson Education Canada and GoodMinds.com, aim to educate students about Indigenous history and culture. Programs such as Lakehead University's Elementary School K-12. Indigenous Education Initiative emphasize land-based learning and storytelling. However, the effectiveness of these resources depends on how they were presented by educators, and many schools still lack Indigenous-led teachings. Post-secondary institutions such as George Brown College have taken steps to decolonize their curriculum by integrating Indigenous perspectives and creating advisory councils and having programs like this in order to educate the public and end the detrimental impacts of colonial influences in Canada. The same applies to the Durham's District School Board's Indigenous education programs, which include Indigenous voices. However, when investigating the training, many high school teachers don't take before teaching an Indigenous studies program. It continues to be influenced by Western academic models, limiting true decolonization. These programs still adhere to rigid Western educational structures, prioritizing formal classroom settings over traditional, Indigenous approaches like outside-based learning and community-based learning. Indigenous knowledge is often treated as supplementary rather than foundational, and Indigenous educators frequently have limited influence in decision-making processes. Additionally, funding for Indigenous education initiatives remains inconsistent, making it difficult to sustain long-term, meaningful change. Without fundamentally restructuring these programs to prioritize Indigenous sovereignty in education, they remain tied to colonial methodologies. Steps toward decolonizing Indigenous education. To truly decolonize Indigenous education, we must move forward beyond surface level inclusivity and actively engage with Indigenous communities in order to stop the colonial influences in society. Some key actions we can take part in this is by having land-based learning. Schools should integrate outdoor, land-based education and where students engage with nature, learn traditional skills, and reconnect with Indigenous ways through the spirits of the land, powwows, and various ceremonies. Language revitalization. Indigenous languages must be taught in schools to preserve and strengthen cultural identity. In order to revitalize some Indigenous languages, we can have language apps. In order to teach individuals, we can have education-based meetings and host various conventions to learn more about these cultural aspects of these amazing languages. Indigenous-led curriculum development. This is very important because Indigenous communities must be at the forefront of designing educational programs, ensuring that teachings are accurate and reflect traditional knowledge. Teacher training. Non-Indigenous educators should undergo mandatory training to understand Indigenous histories, perspectives, and teaching methods. And lastly, decolonizing academic structures. Universities and colleges should restructure their curricula to prioritize Indigenous ways of knowing rather than forcing Indigenous knowledge to fit within Eurocentric academic standards. Decolonizing Indigenous education would have profound benefits for Indigenous communities. It would restore cultural pride, strengthen identities, and provide Indigenous youth with an education that aligns with their values and histories. This would lead to better mental health outcomes, increased academic success, and stronger community connections. For Canadian society as a whole, a decolonized education system would promote reconciliation, foster respect, and build a more inclusive and truthful understanding of history. By recognizing and valuing Indigenous knowledge, we take a critical step toward healing the damage caused by colonialism and creating an equitable future for all. In conclusion, decolonizing Indigenous education is not just about including Indigenous perspectives. It is about the dismantling colonial structures and replacing them with the Indigenous-led, culturally relevant educational models. It is about giving Indigenous students the space to learn in ways that honor their traditions, histories, and identities. If we commit to these changes, we can move forward to a future where education is a tool for empowerment rather than assimilation.
To finalize our presentation, here is a short video that amplifies the importance of having Indigenous study programs in Canada.
It's one of those courses where I come home and it's all I can talk about.
Having Indigenous studies as a graduation requirement
is a simple but very effective step our education system can take
because, we're working towards reconciliation.
Making this course a graduation requirement sends a message that
learning about Indigenous history in Canada is just as important as the other course requirements we already have.
They'll realize how enriching it is to learn about all these First Peoples cultures and traditions.
Indigenous-focused courses will help me see the importance of seeking knowledge from different peoples and cultures.
I think people really need to learn what happened to the past to understand the future.
I just think it's such an incredible experience that we should have been doing for a long time.
Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. And to learn more about Indigenous education, please visit your local Indigenous Cultural Center and follow Humber Indigenous and Indigenous Education Network on Instagram. Thank you so much.